Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the InterDrone podcast. My name is CJ Smith. I'm with the InterDrone team, joined today with my colleague, Michael Pehel. And we have two fantastic guests. We have Vic Moss of Moss Photography and DroneU. And then we're also joined with Brian Garret-Glaser from Access Intelligence. So thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting us.
Absolutely. And we want to say a quick thank you to our podcast sponsor for today, GRAD, Integrated Solutions for Accident Reconstruction and Crime Scene 3D Modeling. So there's been a pretty busy week in the UAS space, as most weeks are. We have a couple great articles to talk to you guys about today, and then we will jump into a quick interview with Vic. The first article we want to talk about, so the FAA announced their drone training initiative. So they were kind of announcing an unmanned aircraft systems collegiate training, and it really allows educational institutions and the FAA to work collaboratively with students who are looking to pursue careers in the industry. Mike, what are some of your thoughts? It's passed over to you to kind of kick this off. Are you excited to see this? Has there been a lot of handholding for students that are looking to get involved in the space? And kind of what do you think caused the FAA to do this?
Well, I think to get into anything in aerospace, you kind of have to be really, really passionate about it. And one of the kind of issues that we've had building a real kind of community of people who actually know how to fly safely and within the legal limits is we had the consumer revolution where people kind of just jumped into it, but also we didn't really have a lot of people that are in mass learning about the airspace. And even if you are interested, what's the roadmap for you to get into the automated systems business, or even in small UAS or drones? It's kind of, you have to be driven by passion, or you diverted from a military focused career, which is kind of very different from what commercial operations focus would be, and even your thoughts on airspace would be. So I think any initiative by the FAA to help that is good. But I always question, like, okay, how far are they willing to take it? How much are they going to support it? And then, those are the type of things that I want to be tracking about this kind of project over the next couple months. Vic, you want to kind of take it next?
Yeah, sure. I'm kind of actually excited to see this. Now, we at DroneU, we're not accredited, so we wouldn't be really falling under this. But we see a lot of some other programs who may or may not try to become an accredited program, not really have standards to work from. If you fall back to the manned aviation side of things, I mean, standards are the gospel. If you're running a flight school, you've got A, B, C, and D to do, or else you don't get to do E. And for the unmanned aviation side of things, it just doesn't exist. Whether it's pilot school or whether it's something like Embry-Riddle, which is a great school, they're teaching what they need to teach, but they're not getting the guidance or the technical guidance they really need from the FAA. So I'm really glad to see that in the Authorization Act. It was kind of a fun part to see in there. And we explored it a little bit at DroneU, but we thought, I don't think we want to go quite that deep into the whole accreditation aspect of things.
It's part of the path of moving towards becoming a more professional industry, right? With more legs to stand on. So
absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, and then we're always running into a demand for pilots, but that do those pilots have experience to actually run this operation? Mm-hmm. And the answer is usually no, and it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing. And even the people who do come with, let's say, the vertical knowledge, like I've worked on a construction site for 20 years, that person still doesn't know that they should have been keeping a flight log, simple things like that. And the more that we kind of educate people about those basics and create standards around those basics, like this is the checklist, this is the minimum viable knowledge you need to go out on the job, the better off we are as a community, because people who don't know what they're doing showing up on a job site is bad advertising for all of us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'd like to see the FAA actually take it one step further. And right now with the manned aviation, you've got CFIs, you've got certified flight instructors, and there's no CDI, certified drone instructor. I mean, whatever they call it. I would like to see that developed. And has there been talk about that behind the scenes at the FAA? Possibly. But, you know, for the Joe Blow pilot out there who's just getting started shooting real estate or whatever, not to denigrate real estate photography, but it is kind of the low-hanging fruit of the industry. If you want to move up to, let's say, the construction side or the inspecting oil fields, that's a huge thing right now. You probably ought to have that next step under your belt and be certified in some aspect or another. So I'd love to see it, a certified drone instructor by the FAA.
Yeah, that would be great development.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's next on the agenda, CJ?
Next, we're talking about an article that Brian, you wrote actually. So there's a consortium forming in Canada to promote the commercialization of drones and air taxis. Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about this piece that you wrote? And for anybody that wants to read it, it's on aviationtoday.com. But Brian, why don't you give us kind of that 30,000-foot view of what you wrote about?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start off by just sort of introducing what I've been doing. You mentioned that I cover a lot of urban air mobility, also drone delivery and those sort of more complex operation type things. But I've been tracking the attempt to create this urban air mobility industry for a while. I think it's become a little bit more formalized now, or what's a better way to put that? It's become a little more. There's a lot more weight behind it now than there was 18 months ago, with the Air Force stepping in as well. And I think we'll get to that in a little bit. But a good friend of mine, J.R. Hammond, has been working for the past year or so with the support of the Canadian federal government to try to put together this consortium of players across academia, government, industry, et cetera, to support air taxis, drones, drone deliveries, just formalizing the industry and trying to get everybody on the same page, working together, regulators, everyone that would have a foot in this, to do everything they can to bring the world of drone deliveries and air taxis closer to Canada. They're trying to support, a couple of the drone delivery companies in Canada have been trying to take advantage of, or take advantage is a bad way to put it, but they've been trying to leverage the COVID-19 situation as a way to prove their worth in a public service oriented way. And so that article was sort of covering some of the major players in Canada that have been moving to try to say, here's what we want to do that's more complex than what we're allowed to do now, on a waiver system or, getting specific approvals. Here's what we want to do, and we're showing that we're capable of doing this. The nearer term is drone deliveries. You've got companies like the name is escaping me. You've got Drone Delivery Canada, but there's another one based on the West Coast I can't remember at the moment, that have been doing medical-related drone deliveries for 5 years or so now. A lot of them BVLOS.
Zipline?
Not Zipline. It's in the article there. One moment, I'll pull it up here. It starts with an I.
Zipline is a good example, though.
Zipline is
Africa.
a great example. Where are these guys here?
Well, it's interesting because he's saying it starts with an I, and I don't know one that starts with an I. There's actually a lot of companies that stay under the radar, headline-wise, that are doing things, and we just, they don't have like the Silicon Valley marketing kind of team.
Indro Robotics is the name of the company. They've been doing a lot of great work, and they are working with some of the Vancouver government agencies at the moment in British Columbia to establish distribution of medical supplies, spare parts, blood samples and the like from a centralized hospital to a series of islands that used to get their supplies from ferries, but the ferry service is now shut down or running far less often than it used to be. So it's really great work. It's all BVLOS, and it's pushing the limits of what's possible. And this consortium is sort of advocating on behalf, or getting everyone together in the same room to talk about how can we push these limits. And then, of course, further down the line, not this year, not next year, the goal is to eventually bring air taxis to urban areas in Canada. It'll take a little bit longer.
How do you compare and contrast kind of the regulation in Canada versus here in the States, and maybe where we are on that path to having BVLOS flights, deliveries, and ultimately maybe even some air taxis?
Well, I'd love to hear your guys' take on that as well. I think that it does seem to me that the FAA is moving slower than a lot of other countries, Canada included. It seems that this project it hasn't started yet. This Indro Robotics distribution of spare parts, etc., via BVLOS flights over water mainly. It hasn't started yet, but the idea that the FAA would even sit down and draw up plans to do something like that and try to rapidly introduce this within a couple of months, I just don't see that happening. So I think that there's no doubt that Canada's regulators are moving quicker. There's also, they put more credence to environmental, causes for the environmental importance of things like electric air taxis, or trying to take actions that work that could be done on the ground using, fossil fuels and move that up into the sky using electric drones. They care more about that. British Columbia recently passed a tax exemption for electric aircraft and everything, all services and manufacturing and parts related to electric aviation. It's only like
incentive.
It's like 7% taxes that companies would pay, so it's not game changing, but it's a pretty big deal, and that's very forward looking. And I don't see that happening anywhere in the U.S. outside of maybe California.
Hey, my grandfather way back in the day, he used to tell me if you could shave 2 cents off of a dryer that you're selling, that over 100,000 models starts to add up to cash. Over a million models, 2 million models, it starts to add up to cash. And when you're thinking about, anything in aerospace at that level that you're discussing, we're talking in millions and billions.
7% is a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot of salaries, or a nice yacht.
So what do you guys think? How would you guys compare the pace of Canada, FAA, other countries?
I'll let Vic take the lead, and I'll cower as the conference chair.
There we go. That's funny. I'm trying to think if I can say this or not, and how I can say it. I've been talking with somebody within the FAA about lack of ability to deliver under 107 rules, and how the way to do it right now is you have loopholes you have to jump through. And obviously you can't go BVLOS, you can't go over people, things like that. And there's no framework in place for this to actually go ahead and move forward yet. So I'm really happy to hear what's going on with Transport Canada, because I wish the FAA and Transport Canada would work together more often. I mean, we've got the stuff that we can work together with, rather than recreate the wheel north and south of the border. It just doesn't make sense. But the FAA is very risk averse. Yeah. And as they say, the FAR aims are written in blood. So something has to happen for a new rule to be made, instead of being proactive. And there are a number of people within the FAA that I deal with that would like to see an actual, instead of jumping through this hoop and this hoop, you actually do A, B, C, and D. And then you can go ahead and use your delivery. So use your 107 for delivery services. You have things like hazmat. Like, for instance, one of the things we talked about was, right now you can deliver a COVID test to somebody who's isolated, or an island is a great example. I live in Colorado, so we don't have a lot of islands. But so it didn't cross my mind. But once that test has now been done by the person being tested, it can no longer be flown back on a drone, because it's now has hazardous material. So there's those kind of things that have to be, those regulations that need to be either waived or rewritten in a way that say, that is X and not this, and you don't want to be sending a quart of tainted blood over a city. I mean, obviously, but a simple COVID-19 test. Let's use something appropriate right now in the news. You swab yourself, or you swab your wife or husband or whatever, put it back in there, and boom, put it back in the drone, hit the button, and go. It goes back to where it came from. That should be something that's relatively simple to do. We need to wait for remote ID, unfortunately. I know that's not a real happy subject for a lot of people to talk with, but until we get the remote ID aspect in, we can't really then get too deep into BVLOS and over people and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think one thing I'd like to see from the FAA, the test sites, the participants from the manufacturer class, is actually either pressure on the FAA from the manufacturers or the test sites, so they could actually generate revenue, because a lot of them don't generate as much revenue as was expected, and for the FAA to say, okay, here are the data buckets we want. Give us this data back, and they haven't really done that. And then also from the FAA just wanting that data, rather than letting it go to a country like Canada or Switzerland or probably Southeast Asia now, where they're creating this data pools, and we, depending on our relationships with those nations, will we get that data? Fortunately, CAAs are more likely to share that data among each other than other institutions within the governments on their separate projects. But still, we're kind of, if we can't get the data, we can't prove the use case, we can't actually build this thing out. Yeah. And the truth of the matter is, we know certain operations can run relatively safely. We're just actually limiting them falsely, because we don't want to think about the impact it has on the commercial airspace as it stands. But I do think this moment in history, just looking at the flight map shrink, I think we watched last week, they gave a BB-loss waiver for certain use, and they were looking at others. The safety case against drones diminishes statistically. To the point where I think it's worth saying we should allow certain operations in certain circumstances be run, so we can get that test data, so we can set those standards even for the test site when the manufacturer comes in and says, I want to run this test, and make it worthwhile for them financially. Because you could run a test right now, create a pile of data, and the FAA can look at it and be like, this is not the data I want, try again. And that's not a situation that actually incentivizes testing.
Yeah, that's very true. And when it comes to aviation, I mean, manned aviation it changes so slowly that's the pace at which the FAA works. Innovation in the manned aviation world is not that fast. I mean, let's look at a 727 made in the 70s and something now. They're still very similar aircraft with very similar parts and pieces, and so that's what the FAA has geared themselves into changing. And so pops up drones, and they have to have a whole new integration office, the whole 9 yards. And so one of the nice things I hear from the FAA is the fact that, hey, we need to innovate faster. We need to accept faster. We need to we don't need to be so far behind the curve. I'm not sure we'll ever be in front of the curve when it comes to any government agency doing anything. But so we are seeing the FAA turn slightly. It's kind of like turning the Queen Mary around. You don't do it on, it doesn't turn on a dime. But we have people within the system, which I think actually the pressure needs to come from within the FAA more than from outside the FAA, that really see what the possibilities are and really want to try and get this started. So I'm glad to see that aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking back 6 years ago, when we started InterDrone, we were still before the 333 exemption. And the FAA was behind on their mandate to actually get something on the book for automated systems, small UAS at that point. And then all of a sudden, Part 107 drops to kind of push the ball forward. And that was almost a good enough moment rather than a what we actually needed moment. And we're kind of saddled with that in the current moment as we move towards remote ID. I think one of the things that's interesting, though, is you're going to see the current makeup of the FAA change rapidly as people come out of college. And this, the last article we were talking about, if we're actually, creating programs to create those people, give it 10 years and the person at the FAA is less likely to be a commercial pilot, or not less likely. I think that still will take up the majority of the organization, but there will be less of them by proportion than automated systems people who are going to be the next generation. The same way that, my current company, if you looked at them in the 80s, everything was a trade show floor, and that's the only way their vendors would be able to do business for the year in wholesale. Now, we're creating avenues for them to connect throughout the year online, and the show is the meeting point. That's the type of adaptation that will happen over the decade, just because the people will change.
Yeah, but 10 years is a long time. And 10
Yeah,
years,
if you want it now.
well,
yeah,
We do.
what I'm saying is, what happens to the U.S. Place in the world, place in the industry, competitiveness, supply chains, all of that, if 10 years is the amount of time it takes for some of these things to happen.
we fall behind. Yeah, it quite,
It's a lot.
It's a lot. I don't see it 10 years, though. I think, well, let's look at go back to the U.S. Integration Office. When that was formed, it was full of manned pilots, period. I mean, because that's the only pool they had to pull from, obviously.
Right.
Now you've got people in there. I'm not going to mention who, but there's somebody in there that he took his 107. He's not a drone pilot. He took his 107 so he could understand what we do. He is an ASI. He wants to look at it from our point of view. You've got people in there now that actually fly drones for a living, or not for a living because they're FAA employed, but fly drones either recreationally or just for the heck of it. And you've got the 161,000. I can't remember now. 107. I just looked the other day and number went away. You've got a really big pool now to pull from, the knowledge to pull from. Will they be FAA employees? No, but the FAA has that pool that they can pull information from now that just didn't exist even 4 years ago.
Sure.
So,
no, and then just also even people they could consult with, right? If they were going to ask about small UAS, they'd be talking to the military. And again, that perspective comes, in fact, I think that perspective is still there as the primary focus. As we're trying to protect assets from these things becoming a harmful device, rather than thinking about the commercial opportunity, which is only a recent thing. I remember when Dan Alwell got up at InterDrone 2017 and said we're open for business, and
Right.
whether or not that mission is met, they wouldn't have dared say that when Michael Huerta was there. And Michael was really amenable to the drone community. He first came and talked at the show in 2016. He was just balancing what the needs of his organization were, the history of his organization are, and the history of the airspace, which is one of the largest, most congested airspaces in the world. That's another reason that they're risk averse. Is like,
and
who
the
wants
safest.
to screw this up? Yeah. Safest, and they were running on mostly radar
Exactly.
up until recently, and they probably still are by proportion. So that makes a huge difference. Like, we don't want to upset the apple cart if things are running safely, just to accommodate what is, quite frankly, money-wise, a much smaller industry. And that's one of the exciting things about UAM. And let's call it eVTOL, let's call it AAM, whatever you want to frame it as. I think we need to get around the acronym. So I'm happy you call it air taxi, as pedestrian as that sounds. It might be good that it would be usable and pedestrian like we've adopted drone. Is that if you talk about something like cargo flight, cargo is money. And you can justify the need to build out the infrastructure and systems that support, people like Vic and his business, people in between who are doing the drone deliveries from house to, from warehouse to actual house, or even just commercial operations over pipelines that are BVLOS. So that's kind of why I back those efforts. You need that money on the table for the FAA to do more than, well, we like you and we're interested in how you're innovating, but it's not enough pressure in the same way that, well, I have these airlines and they need to operate safely because they're actually what drives the aviation business in the United States.
Well, and the other thing that drives the aviation business is, of course, the military putting pressure on things. And this is I think this might be the next article on the list. I'm not sure.
Go for it.
But,
Great segue.
So all last week, the Air Force held this virtual kickoff of Agility Prime, is what they're calling this effort to bring air taxis to market. And it's kind of everything we've been talking about for the past 5 to 10 minutes is wrapped up in this. It's the military stepping in and saying, we really care about what happens here. This space, the U.S. needs to have a presence here. It's the military saying, we screwed up on small UAS and we lost the entire supply chain to China. And now I think the Will Roper quote, Will Roper's the chief acquisition guy for the Air Force. He said something like, the Department of Defense has to sign off on every use of a DJI drone, which is true. And so how do we avoid this happening with air taxis in the future? Because they can see all sorts. It's pretty obvious that there's military use for electric aircraft. It's a pretty clear dual use technology. And of course, now we live in an age where I think the stat is, I don't know, 75, 80% of R&D comes out of the commercial sector, not the military sector, unlike, 30, 40 years ago. So this is the military looking at this and saying, okay, not only are we going to put the resources in to try to make sure that, this technology is developed because it's beneficial for the military, but we also think that there is a military necessity to having a functioning and profitable commercial industry behind this. And so they're setting the bar for success at commercial success, not something that they can procure, which I think is very smart. And the question is, what impact will that have on everything we've been talking about? Will that place pressure on the FAA? Hopefully, I think. But also, the military is trying to use their resources, their wind tunnels, their test ranges, and their certification and their ability to say, go fly missions for us, or even fly them over stadiums to get, public approval, to give all of that data to the FAA to help them move their process forward as well. So, question for you guys: is this a good thing? What impact will this have? Will it be significant, or is this not something that's really going to impact the speed at which the FAA moves?
Wow.
Go ahead.
No, that's tough. I'm going to let you take it. But
okay, thank you.
I'm going to formulate more thoughts.
Seeing a strategy here. You're dodging the knocking.
I like it. Well, I look at it like, okay, DoD wants to come in. And they've got the R&D money. They've got the R&D bank that they can do that. And not all entities, not all commercial entities are going to want to go into a DoD contract with DoD as the end client. But if DoD is willing to say, okay, you develop this for us, we'll give you $3 million, $20 million, $400 million, whatever, to you to develop this for us. And oh, by the way, this could also be a commercial market for you. I see that as huge for the industry, because that just does not exist right now. You've just got people trying to get money from investors and blah blah blah, and investors are shying away from the UAS market right now because of so much what's going on. Yeah. Everybody's consolidating and stuff like that. So the fact that we've got the DoD willing to help the commercial market, the civilian commercial market, I think is a huge thing. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I think so. I'll actually be more controversial. So I think it's a double-edged sword in a couple ways. I think there's a tendency in America to let the free market run things, right? Because we get results like the iPhone out of that. But we also got, NAFTA out of that. We also got what essentially was a small UAS supply chain being entirely Chinese, and whether or not you think that's a good thing, you really kind of depends on which side of the aisle you fall on. But when you look at military spending and investment in things, I think people look back at the history 50 years ago and say, well, they helped invent the internet. Well, the people at MIT and elsewhere helped invent the internet with DARPA money. But was their goal to serve a military end? And eventually the technologies that were built and the markets that we built in the 70s, 80s, 90s up till today started producing superior products because market forces were developing them rather than single spec sheets from a single purchaser, as I think the government is referred to in the military kind of base of vendors. And so it's interesting to see them kind of give up on that single buyer model a little bit with this kind of hedged model. The SAR program was, I think, the genesis of that. And Auterion and PX4's ecosystem was the first open source project the military ever backed. Open source, thinking about that, that's as scary and open as you can get for the military, who likes to have asymmetrical information control. Right. They want to have the best eggs in their basket, and they'll give the rest to the market to help develop. So I think, there has to be willpower. But if you're going to spend through the military to hope to generate an infrastructure here, you're going to end up having to spend more. At some point, you also have to make up for time, because the model that you're describing actually was the Chinese model for DJI and Yahweh. Right. In those markets, they created a pool of kind of market players, and they picked the best one, and then they funded it. and they said, you're, our champion for this technology.
So,
I think that's what the military is trying to do here, but we still also have to spend more because of lost time.
I think they're trying to take into account everything you're saying and structure their approach to this in a way that minimizes the downsides as much as possible. So they're not picking a single winner. They're not down selecting to a certain number of, and then selecting the best one at the end, or it's not that type of a competition. They're willing to buy multiple systems. They're saying up front, we're not going to buy a ton of these. The real market for this is commercial. Yes, we see uses for these air taxis, electric, whatever you want to call them. We see uses. We're going to buy, I think they've said at least 30, and I'm sure for cargo carrying, they'll probably buy far more than that because they're far cheaper than helicopters. But the main market really is commercial. We're not going to put any defense-specific, defense-unique requirements on these. So they're trying to build it in a way, to structure this in a way. And by the way, they're also not pumping a ton of money in because the money's already there for UAM for the most part. I mean, there's been billions of dollars of investment already. Joby Aviation has raised $720 million, 493 of which came from Toyota. Boeing and Kitty Hawk have put probably 200 million combined into their joint venture Whisk, and Kitty Hawk, of course, is funded by Larry Page, and he funds another company in the UAM space as well. You've got trying to think of the others on the European side. Lilium and Volocopter have both raised over 100 million. I think Lilium closed another round for 270 million. Anyways, the point is the money is there from private venture capitalists who see opportunities here. The problem is more, the resources to get these things certified quickly, right? Having the test ranges, getting the flight hours under their belts and getting the data for the FAA, that sort of thing. And then B, the amount of time and the amount of risk involved between now and return on investment. This is it's a very weird market for traditional investors. Venture capitalists are not used to waiting 7 to 10 years or longer for returns. They don't like to deal with hardware. They don't like to deal with capital intensive industries, and they don't like to deal with regulatory heavy industries.
And in fact, those pressures that they've been creating caused all the problems we had with early small UAS startups.
Well, you've got a great quote in your article from I think it was, Roper. It popped out when I read it. I wasn't even thinking about we were going to talk about this, but it says every hour we log will build confidence in investors, in companies, and in regulators. I mean, that sums up what's going on with the DoD stuff right now.
Yeah. So that they're trying to do that. They're trying not to pump in money and determine a winner or anything like that. They're trying to say as many people as are able to bring an aircraft, get a full-size prototype off the ground and start flying it. We want to give them the resources to support the difficult path between flying prototype and certified, ready for production model. That's the point where they want to try to support, rather than pick a winner or anything like that. So
reducing
really
friction.
Reducing friction, and I mean, what they keep saying is de-risking the industry. So, the last couple of minutes is me all pushing their sort of just regurgitating their point of view. So,
which side are you on?
Yeah, right. but I mean, so they're trying to present it as, we're doing everything we can to not determine winners in this space, so on and so forth. Certainly, the military has a lot of resources to offer in terms of flight hours and
facilities,
testing and stuff.
Testing, yeah.
They're lubricating innovation.
Yeah. Okay.
Sounds good.
That'll be the title of this.
There we go.
Yes. Yeah, we need to start doing clever titles.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think we're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear a quick note from our sponsors of this episode, and we'll be right back to interview Vic.
This episode is brought to you by GRAD. GRAD provides integrated solutions for accident reconstruction and crime scene 3D modeling. GRAD helps first responders and public safety professionals capture all necessary images from the accident or crime scene with one drone flight, along with a handful of P2P laser measurements of control points in about 30 minutes. That's right, 30 minutes. Using the GRAD integrated solutions for collision reconstruction and crime scene 3D models, users will be able to inspect, visualize, and make accurate measurements inside 3D models. GRAD is proud to serve those who protect our communities. Any of you guys heard of Reza at Grad or the work he's done?
No.
Well, I haven't, but I don't follow that vertical very often.
Yeah, not really. You're seeing, right?
No.
Well, I'll have to introduce you to Reza at the next InterDrone, because he's just one of those people that's so super smart and just makes me excited that I work in this industry. My favorite part about this industry is I feel dumb in many conversations, so everything's a learning opportunity.
Yep.
And that's 6 years into it. I still feel like I'm an amateur. But I got people like Reza to school me on an average day. So.
Cool.
Well, yeah, Vic, we'd love to jump in and start asking you a few questions about some of your work in the UAS industry, your role at Moss Photography, and then also at DroneU. You could tell us a little bit about those two companies, what you do there, and kind of how you found your way into UAS.
Wow. I've been a commercial photographer for actually 32 years now this year. Graduated with a degree in photography in 1988. So I'm one of those people who have an art degree that don't use the phrase, "Would you like fries with that?" every day in their job. And I shouldn't. That's not entirely true, but most art degrees are what they are. So I got into drones. I started looking at drones 2000. I want to say 4. This is 2000. No, not that. 2014. Sorry, adding 10 years to that. Wow. When the P2 first came out, the DJI Phantom 2, I just looked at it like, it's the world's most tallest, most versatile tripod out there. So it gives me something else to throw a camera on and get up in the air. Talked to a client who had somebody who actually flew, I think it was a 172 around and took progression photos of their projects once a month. So I talked to them and I said, "Hey, if I buy a drone, can I play with some of it on your projects?" And they said, "Yeah." Now they're one of my biggest clients. We've actually trained a number of their project managers to get their 107 now. So it is a general contractor. So I got into that and then just started having fun with it. And here in Colorado, they started talking about controlling drones, using drones to, or making laws to control drones. And I went to a meetup group called Colorado Aerial Media Pros, and we went around, introduced ourselves to everybody. And when it came my turn, I said, "Oh, by the way, who's doing the legislative stuff here? Because this is going on in the Colorado legislature." And nobody raised their hand. So I left that meeting as the legislative liaison for Colorado Aerial Media Pros, not knowing what I was getting into. But it's just been a ton of fun. I've ended up with more knowledge of aviation law than I thought I ever would in my life. It's been
haven't we all?
Yeah, really, very true. And it's something that sorely needs to be done because there's so many people out there that don't understand actually what I consider the simple rules. But maybe I'm so deep into it that it seems simple to me. So it's been a lot of fun doing that. And then about 5 years ago, I met Paul Aiken with DroneU here. He was actually flying a drone on the flight line at the Greeley Air Show here. First time anyone was allowed to do that, and he broadcast his feed onto this giant board so people could see, the planes flying by in the air. And it was really cool. First time anybody had been able to fly a drone actively on an air show flight line while planes were in the air. So that was kind of cool. And then one thing led to another, and I was brought into DroneU and the ownership team about 2.5 years ago at this point as their photography instructor. Now as their policy director and also one of the DroneU elite pilots. We have what we call our elite pilots who are also trainers. So that's how I ended up at DroneU. It's been fun.
You guys deal with a lot of pilots. Obviously, a lot of the FAA testing centers are closed.
Yeah.
How have you been helping pilots and who either need to renew their 107s or need to take their 7s for the first time, kind of navigate the current landscape?
Well, the current landscape is if you need your initial 107, you're hosed. Okay. You cannot take it. If the testing centers are closed in your state, you just can't take it. It's that simple. It is not considered critical infrastructure, critical essential operations, I should say, by the FAA. So they never even considered that because by the time they got through with that aspect of changing the rules, it would have been a year down the road, as we've talked about earlier. But the person who actually Kevin Morris, he's the guy who really kind of went out for us, went to bat for us in the integration office, trying to get the UGR, the unmanned ground test, recurrency test, to the point where somebody who cannot take it now can still fly legally. They talked about doing, just a non-enforcement issue, which is fine and doable unless you're insured, which hopefully you are. If you're flying and it's not enforced, you're still flying illegally. So they knew they couldn't do that because if you have an incident, the insurance company can say, hey, you're flying illegally. Can't do that. So Kevin reached out to myself and another drone pilot. I'll let her mention that if she wants to at some point in life, about writing a letter to the FAA saying, hey, this is why the UGR needs to be considered essential. You've got things like the people who work search and rescue, first responders, even like myself. It's my business. I pay my mortgage. Well, that's not necessarily the what they were looking for as far as paying mortgages and stuff like that. They did understand that you've got a lot of people who can't fly legally and whose insurance is an issue at the state level, at the county level, at the city level, and the UGR needs to be part of the essential businesses. And so they set it up that we can take the 107 UGR pilots can take the online test for the recurrency that's usually only available to manned aviators who have a current Part 61 license. So that'll be good for 6 months, and they can do it up to, I believe, June 1st. Maybe it's July 1st. I don't remember exactly, but it's on the FAA site, faa.gov/UAS. So you just go on to faasafety.org or .gov, and you take the UGR test, and you're good. You have to go ahead and go to the testing center in 6 months, so you're current, but you're good. So it took longer than they wanted, but they got it done in 30 days. And so for them, that's phenomenal. Considering that it's also, there's a whole bunch, it's not just the unmanned side. I mean, there's manned aviation extension and stuff like that in that sheet as well. So huge shout out to the FAA for doing that for us.
Do you see that getting extended if conditions don't get better?
It's been brought up, and basically the comment was, yes, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I kind of like to use to mix metaphors. Say we'll burn that bridge when we get there, but either before or after we cross it is kind of how we have to decide how we're going to handle it. But they realize that this is not the end all be all, and if this goes on 3 months, the nice thing about how it is now is the process is set. So it's like, oh boy, it comes up. Let's say we're 2 weeks before the extension is done, and it's obviously not going to be good. It's not going to happen. Places aren't open yet, or people are still too scared to go out and take the test because you're in a little cramped little cubicle when you're in those rooms. It's just like, okay, here, executive order, blah blah blah, extension. So it's the process exists, and if it needs to be done, it'll be done pretty quickly. I think. No inside information there. Sorry.
What industries have you seen really kind of grow rapidly over the past 2, 3, 4 years? And do you get a lot of people are reaching out from specific industries to you at DroneU to try to learn more? Like, how have you kind of seen that evolve?
The mapping has just blown up, obviously. So that's a huge side. Agriculture didn't quite grow as much as we thought it would, but a lot of that's the regulatory side of things. For a lot of the agriculture stuff, you need your Part 137, so you can spray that kind of thing as well, that the crop dusters have to have. So that didn't quite pick up. The technology's there. The mass-produced technology is not quite there yet, and some of the regulatory issues aren't there yet. So once that happens, that's going to pop up real quick. But accident reconstruction, search and rescue, that kind of thing has really been huge. Mapping being the biggest part, the accuracy that the mappers can get. With drones is just, it's phenomenal what we can do now. Is it to the microsecond or to the micro inch or whatever? No, but does it need to be 95% of the time? No. And you can do it faster and cheaper from the air than you can traipsing through a swamp with with your ground station and fighting off the snakes and the alligators, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So that's the biggest part. The photography and the video side, which what I do is, it's there and it always will be there, but it's not the growth that it was at first. I mean, that was the growth model at first, but it's not there anymore, which is fine. I have no problem with it.
Yeah, there was a saturation point in the early market for that. And also on the agriculture point, you got to get to a level of efficiency to justify the integration. And we've talked about how, countries that don't have precision agriculture infrastructure set up, or countries that have terrace farming where the use case becomes more clear for fast and rapid integration. The U.S., we have factory farms that are operating pretty well.
Right.
So you can't just give this is a 10% better case because we actually can't prove that 10% better yet at the scale that we talking about, where the yield makes the difference. Back to those small percentages over an entire crop of a factory farm, 1 to 2% that you could bet on. That's a big percentage,
right?
But it's hard. 1 to 2% is not scientifically margin of error. You got to be 3 to 4% to really make the investment worthwhile.
I mean, and one thing we have in the United States that most other countries don't have are these multi-thousand acre fields of corn and wheat and that kind of thing. It's like that just doesn't. I mean, in Canada it does, but for the most part, it just does not exist anywhere else in the country or anywhere else in the world. And getting a drone type situation where there's fixed, well, it'll have to be fixed wing or something like that, to be able to do that effectively just isn't there yet. I think that's also a big part of why you're seeing the innovation in Asia and in Europe and places like that, where it's the smaller farms that can, like you said, you can justify the yield on something like that.
Brian, you were going to ask a question?
Yeah, I was just going to add, you got to remember this is comparing, I mean, we all know this, but we're comparing a nascent industry and a nascent set of technologies to something that's been tweaked and turned and developed for 50, 60, 70, or 100 years. It's like ICE versus electric cars. They've been perfecting this for a long time, and the value proposition is going to be there. It's just, it's going to take a couple of years for the technology to get off the ground and really prove itself.
And I think some industries are more receptive to technology and innovation, some not as much. And I wonder if agriculture falls into the latter a little bit.
Yeah,
true. You look at the technology they've got in their combines these days. I mean, those suckers drive themselves.
And down to the seed accuracy. So like if you're not dropping at 98, 90% like seed per the hole you expected it to go in, that's considered bad. And you have to fix the sensor. You got to determine whether or not you're double seeding, and the readouts are that efficient. Yeah. So if, I think there was a lot of kind of puffery, from the drone people, because it's so cool that you could create these 3D maps so fast, and we can automate the route of the drone. Clearly, this will be useful to you. And the farmers are like, we got this.
We're good. We're good.
Come up with something better, and then we'll talk.
And we will.
We will. Because we have the ability to scale where a tractor is so refined. We know how optimized that is now.
Yep.
So this is new, and to Brian's point about maturity. We've actually had almost everything toolbox wise that we could create with drones. Almost everything we're doing is using those abstractions to build larger vocabularies of use cases, and then setting up protocols that optimize those use cases. We're not really even there yet. We're just beginning that journey. And add AI on that, and the fact that when you develop those algorithms, the more training data you give it over time, the better results you get, or actually problem solve why you're not getting the good result and feeding it new data that will give it a better result. All of that actually has to be negotiated by people feeding the data in, and it takes time.
Yep.
Yeah. Vic, what do you think a drone's pilot's rights are? So if you're going to write the Bill of Rights for a drone pilot, what are some items you'd have to put on there?
Wow. CJ, cut this afterwards. This is going to be good.
Wow. I wish I had that one said to me about a day ago.
Yeah, we did not give him any prep for this.
I think the biggest thing I'd love to see is the Department of Transportation Inspector General consider us, I don't want to say on the same level as like a 747 pilot or whatever, but give us the same protections that we have already given to us, but enforce those on things like interfering with us when we're trying to fly, shooting down, shooting at, things like that. I think, number one, Bill of Rights number one is give us the protection we deserve. because we do deserve it. If somebody shoots us down or we crash, are we going to kill 375 people behind us? No, we're not. So there is that aspect of it, but it's a matter of time. If something doesn't happen, someone's going to get hurt or worse at this point, whether it's a drone pilot or it's somebody assaulting a drone pilot. Because I know a number of them who carry both open and concealed now because of the stories we hear. I carry bear gel. That's legal here in Colorado, so I carry a big old tube of bear gel on my belt if I feel the need to. Give us a little more. Let's see. Number 2, Bill of Rights. Let's go with pure access to the NAS. We're restricted to 400 feet, which for 90% of the time is fine. We need to be higher at times. Mm-hmm. Bill of Rights number 3. Let's physically separate helicopters. We don't have to worry about the fixed wing guys. They're usually at 500 feet or more. Usually 1,000 actually for most of the flights where take place. But helicopters come in low, and so let's get them up there. Okay. Let's give them that 1,000-foot floor as well. I think that'll help a lot because helicopters scare me, and it's my responsibility as a drone pilot to avoid them. I totally understand that, but let's give us a little bit more ceiling. Mm-hmm. And cut the floor out from the manned crowd. They're not going to like to hear that.
No,
sorry.
They are not.
But we're going to feel bad if something happens. We are, and let's just we have to work together. We have to share the airspace. Bill of Rights number 4. What could that be? That could be what? That could be a DJI related Bill of Rights. Let's go there.
Yeah. Why not?
DJI has their qualified entities program, their QEP for first responders and things like that, where they unlock drones. Give it to us. Let us have it. Figure out some way to qualify the 107 pilots so we can do things like fly 2 miles off the end of a runway in a 150-foot square without having to go through an unlock, things like that. So. What else? I can't think of anything else right off. You should have let me know this a little sooner.
On the first point that you mentioned. What do you think about drone pilot safety and dealing with other people trying to shoot you down, that kind of thing? What do you think about the remote ID proposal to have the operator's location broadcast in addition to the drone?
You obviously didn't read my article on that. No, I'm just kidding.
Not yet.
No, that's fine.
Oh, that's a good one. That's historical. I would read it. If part of our ID comes out and says, okay, the USS or whoever, or if you've got an app on your phone that shows you where the drone pilot is, you will have virtually nil as far as cooperation from the drone pilots. They're not going to do it because safety is involved, and the FAA understands that. If you go back and read, as long as we're on remote ID, I won't go too deep into this, but if you go back and you read remote ID, you'll see where different agencies pulled out different parts and rewrote it because there's areas that fight with each other wording wise. And all those types of things are from the security agencies. Right. FAA was ready to go with it, 14 months before, and then they pulled it last minute because of the security agency concerns.
Right.
And part of that was we want to know where every pilot's standing and every drone is in the air at all times, real time. So the FAA said, well, that's not really possible. And they said, we don't care. And so that was the gist of a lot of the comments out there. But if they don't have compliance, they don't have remote ID. So I think they understand that. It is going to be a huge safety issue. And if it's required, you're not going to get compliance. And you're going to start seeing a huge increase in incidents.
Yeah, compliance is a huge deal, right? Mm-hmm. And some people feel that there's probably a lot of non-Part 107 operations going on now under the some feel as in like we pretty realistically know there are. Mm-hmm. And the Part 107 isn't even that much of a barrier. It's just a lack of enforcement. Mm-hmm. We've joked on this podcast before that it's easier to get a massage license or harder to get a massage license in LA than it is to get a Part 107.
Okay. I like that.
No, that's actual fact.
I have no doubt it's actual fact.
So look into that. But I think if we're going to move forward, pilots have to feel safe. And I really questioned the idea. This was like a bone to the public that you would know where the operator is.
Right.
And I think it has the reverse effect. It just empowers a public that doesn't understand the technology
Bingo.
to harm the operator. And it ultimately doesn't make them feel any safer when, if that information is given to a law enforcement agency or some type of central service where they could check in, that's a much safer kind of operation where, the public is calling out and say, hey, we've seen a drone flying over our baseball field during our Pee Wee games. Who was that? Not who was that, what was that is what they could ask. Oh, well, that person was surveying, this drainage sump over to the side of the field. Don't worry about it. Or on the opposite end, if it was a threat, no, we don't know who that is. Now we're going to check that airspace for that person. And that's a perfectly a much better solution than I think what was put into.
Oh, huge.
But I won't make public statements like that in writing.
I will.
You won't see that comment in the remote ID stuff. But I'll safely say it here on the podcast, I think.
Yeah. Well, I'm also a FAA safety team member here in the Denver FSDO. I'm one of 3 what they call drone pros, although I hate that name, that when FSDO has a problem with a drone pilot and all they need is a little education, I'm one of 3 drone pros that the Denver FSDO calls. So we definitely see a ton of people who just don't know. It's rarely an attitude thing. It's usually an ignorance thing. And not ignorance in the pejorative sense, but just ignorance in that they didn't know. Although sometimes it is ignorance in the pejorative sense. But for the most part, it's just lack of education, lack of enforcement is what's really slowing things down.
Brian, do you have any questions for Vic before we tap out?
No, I think that's about it. I think actually someone might be here to pick up our couch. So it might be time for me to get going and help out in a more physical way. But this has been great. Vic, great to meet you. And thanks you guys for bringing me on the podcast.
Sure.
Thanks so much, Brian.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Wilkesboro?
Yeah. Actually, Brian, if you want to drop out, Vic and us will cover some extra drone news because this is really interesting. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, Brian.
All right, hey, thanks.
Where can people find you?
And you can find me. I'm on Twitter at Garret-Glaser. Good luck spelling that, but you can try. Or aviationtoday.com. You'll see all my coverage of urban air mobility and air taxis and all that stuff. So thanks again.
Cheers. Awesome. Thank you.
And we'll put that stuff in the description for anybody that wants to read more. But I think this is actually a great segue from.
Oh, it's funny.
Kind of from the Bill of Rights that we were just talking about. So Vic, you sent this over to us last night. So in Wilkesboro, in North Carolina, they passed an emergency resolution that basically prohibited drones within 100 feet of or above the Tyson food plant during the COVID state of emergency. Talk to us a little bit about what you heard. I know there isn't a lot of isn't too much kind of covering this right now out on the web, but I know
there really isn't, but there will be this time tomorrow.
Yeah, right.
This time tomorrow there will be, I promise you, and I'll tell you why. Somebody reached out to me because a lot of people, then when a city tries to do something like this, a lot of times people reach out to me. In this case, he actually reached out to DroneU, and I picked up the ball and ran with it. In that they're trying to control the NAS, which obviously anybody who knows anything about this understands they can't do that without FAA cooperation. The FAA is very, very adamant about that, but they're not proactive about it. So this person reached out to DroneU. I picked it up, and it's become a very interesting situation in that nobody from the town council of Wilkesboro will reach out to me. I've sent numerous emails. But when in my original email, I CC'd the editor of the local paper. So that was kind of fun, but he did not reach out to me. He reached out to Mickey Osterreicher because I also CC'd Mickey, and Mickey is the general counsel for the National Press Photographers Association and a drone pilot and a friend. And so Mickey gave him an NPPA statement, and that will run tomorrow or I don't know if it's an evening paper or morning paper, whatever. I think it's called the Wilkes Dispatch, something or another. I can't remember. And so once that's up and on the web, I'm going to do my best to just absolutely flood everybody with it. But it is a First Amendment issue. It's an NAS issue. Right. And it's stupid for lack of better words, because a 100-foot buffer with a drone. I'm sorry. Let's throw an X7 up and put a 75 millimeter, or be like RV Hector and put an X5 up with 150 millimeter on it, and 100 feet above the plant. What's that gonna do?
That was my question. I don't necessarily understand the motivation.
In the research,
maybe part of my
privacy. The motivation was privacy and protection.
Yeah.
Oh, if a drone crashes, it's going to terrible. The usual.
It was probably just Tyson making sure, not to be conspiracy theorists, but there's clear incentives for them to try and shut down cameras on what is clearly an evolving situation with plants.
The COVID, yes.
Yeah, and they can control the news camera. Nobody wants to talk about that with the press, because in order to get in the door, you kind of have to have the relationship in the first place, and that's a limitation of even a free and active press. But the drone allows people to literally leap over that, and I think that's what they nudged their friend in the local government, and they got it done. So
because if at face value, I don't understand why this would limit the threat of COVID. It's an unmanned vehicle flying above a building that has a roof on it, so I don't really understand.
That was the buzzword they used. And on the record, Tyson is the largest employer in Wilkesboro, and they and
Company Town.
Let's say it's Company Town. I think them and Lowe's are the two. Is it Lowe's or Home Depot? One of those two. Their corporate offices are there. And then as you go down the list, because somebody sent it to me, everything else is pretty much government agency below that. So they have pull, and they use their pull. I'm sure this is speculation on my part, because no one will get back to me from the government, to ask them to do this. And they took bad information from whichever lawyer they actually talked to, and obviously didn't talk to anybody who flies drones, because 100 feet,
that's
really?
kind of clear in the way that it's written in all the whereases.
They love whereases.
It's just these don't line up with each other as even like creating a boundary of thought about what the circumstances would be.
But Tyson didn't want people to have pictures of the plant public of them not working, or them, supposedly everybody's wearing PPEs. That's fine. If there's, all our people are wearing PPE, and they get pictures of a bunch of people out sitting there smoking cigarettes, sitting on the bench together without PPE on, then that's what they don't want out there in the general public. It's like, well, sorry, spend $1 billion and put a big old roof over your facility, because that's the only way you can legally do it. Fine. If you don't want me to fly a drone 100 feet above your stuff, I'll rent myself a 172 and throw 1,000 millimeter lens on my Nikon, and guess what? I can count the hairs on your head. I mean, it's just stupid what they're trying to do. They just didn't think it through.
But definitely reactionary.
Oh, big time reactionary, as are most drone laws that I've dealt with and drone ordinances. But the vast majority of time when I do this, I don't know how many different city councils I've talked to in the last 2 years, some in person and some online and some emails. With the exception of a couple, they really want to do the right thing, and they want to work with us, and they want to work with me and the other people that are working with them. Even my own local city of Lakewood, Colorado, we got them to open up 3 parks for us just this summer. And now, actually, we can go fly in those parks, and because nobody's allowed in the parks and the playground, so we can go hang out at the playground and fly. So that's interesting at least for the end of May. So I just don't understand the thought processes behind it. I guess that's what floored me the most is why.
It won't be the last, and it certainly isn't the first. And I think one of the things that I don't know if you saw. Actually, I won't even bring it up. It's too political, but
the Florida person's response and
the gentleman in Florida, the congressman from Florida,
that's not good.
But I see something like that and I say, oh God, this is not going to help public perception, no matter how you feel about the security issue. I don't think that's the best case or nuanced argument to make for it if you do, or if you are concerned about that. And, we're just going to keep seeing things of that nature. But we as an industry have to stand up when it actually does matter for our pilots' rights. And that's what you've been great at. And when, there isn't cause for alarm, to say this is truly not a case for cause for alarm. I think one of the things with the public safety usage of drones is that it preempted a discussion with the community that this was happening. And that's where the bad feelings start. Whereas if you start from, would you be interested in this to help, rein in social distancing and make sure that it's happening, and the community gave the thumbs up, then everybody would be happy to see their friendly drone enforcing their safety.
Yeah, I can see that. Maybe, I don't know, the Joker in New York that put his little Mavic 2 Enterprise up and broadcast everybody, that did nobody any good.
Yeah, we talked about him on.
Oh, you did? Awesome.
These episodes, yeah.
We're going to get those instances, but we have to shun the people who are bad actors, and then we also have to kind of stand up for our rights when they're being restricted or violated. Exactly. And I think as an industry, we also need to understand what those rights are and when they are actually being violated, and the truth behind the Chinese drone issue. There are those of us in the industry that just are anti-Chinese, not drone-wise, and they fed into the fear and paranoia, and it's divided a number of us. But I think if everybody would just take a step back and say, okay, what data is being sent, prove what data is being sent, that kind of stuff, and the fact that there's methods involved, or there's methods in place right now to cut that data flow off. So if bills like that bill were to become more prominent and more likely to pass at this point, you're going to see things, and it will actually physically cost lives. Because if first responders aren't allowed to use DJI equipment, then guess what? That shuts down how many percentage of first responders out there? And Almost
little Timmy walks out into one of those big, huge wheat fields we have out here. He's 3 years old. He got out and he's got lost. He can't turn around. You throw that drone up with a thermal, and you find that kid in 10 minutes, maybe even shorter than that. Whereas and
I think the public accepts that use and likes that use, and that makes them feel good about us and what we do. And I actually made that exact statement to Chris Carodi almost a year ago.
I know that's real well.
Yeah, and it ended up in Drone and On. And that was, as much as I would say, because before I actually knew the security stuff, I wouldn't speak to it.
Sure.
But that much I knew. Result-wise, just speaking to results, it would cost lives if we were to ground the DJI public safety fleet.
Bingo. And that's what people who press or push this, and sadly, most of them are of the party I belong to, let's just go with that, is if they would listen to the right people instead of the few people in D.C. and other places that really just hate Chinese anything. I think that is the biggest thorn in everybody's side right now. It's just like, let's step back from this area of manufacture, and let's look at the tool itself and what can be done to isolate it if that's the fear.
Yeah, and I think that we're reaching that moment where we're seeing, like, when you try to just take an argument that fits your bias without thinking of the consequences down the road. So we might have a common vector where we agree security is important and that we should have an American base of manufacturing. But this is that divergent point where I'm saying, oh no, we still want these drones in the hands of people who could save lives. And they're saying, no, I hate Chinese manufacturing. Right. And we're just going to make sure that nothing from China, we're going to cross that bridge this year. And I think a lot of people who made arguments for their products based on that, still knowing that, hey, that rotor's coming from China. Is that okay? You're
the memory card from China. That part. Silly.
Yeah, and we're all walking around with phones in our pockets with Chinese parts, and I bet that the congressman from Florida tweeted that from an iPhone. So
it's not just the first responder side of things. I lost a job through it was at the Institute of Physics, was going to do a documentary on an area here called Rocky Flats that was a nuclear plutonium plant during the Cold War and is now a national wildlife refuge. And so they wanted me to hire me to put the drone up and fly around this beautiful area, and they've got all kinds of wildlife there. But it's a Department of Interior and a smaller part of DoD land remaining, and they wouldn't let me fly. So, well, you can fly from outside. It's like, yeah, I can, but not legally and not safely. So because I was flying, I wanted to fly one of my DJI birds. They said, yeah, sorry. And now because of COVID, the whole thing's off anyway. But just going through the process of trying to get permission to fly from the DOI for a simple wildlife preserve video documentary was just stupid. Mm. So, but first responders are the ones that are going to suffer.
CJ, you had a question before.
Which then all of us. So
yeah, exactly.
Unfortunately.
Exactly.
Right. Well, Vic, we'll let you go quickly, but last question: what do you think is really holding the industry back? I know we've touched on this a little bit throughout kind of the recording, but at a high level, what would you like to see?
I would like to see relaxation of the regulation, specifically BVLOS and over people. We've got case studies that it's easily doable, and it's easily doable safely. And so if we can really push that forward and not tie it to remote ID, which we could do, we could back the remote ID requirement off in the NPRM in some manner. I don't know the technical way to do that, but I see that as being the biggest thing that's holding back the industry is those two regulations in particular, but just the overall regulations. So I think if we can deregulate some of that, it will help immensely. And I think it's probably on the minds of those who would be the ones making that decision that, hey, we need to do this to help because we are being bypassed right now. We are not the leaders in the UAS industry. Our country is not, and we should be.
Do you think COVID will accelerate some of this regulation? I mean, we're seeing the waiver, the BVLOS waiver come out. So
and in 24 hours,
right? So we know
suddenly okay.
No, they can do that.
It was safe all along.
Exactly. I think in certain aspects of it, I think it's a no-brainer that the COVID issue, it's going to be a really nice silver lining in this really dark cloud. So I think the COVID test cases will certainly help accelerate the timeline. Are we going to start seeing 150 BVLOS and over people waivers by December 31st? No. But I think we're going to start seeing the backing off of what is necessary to go ahead and get one of those waivers because of the case studies we've got right now.
Right. Yeah. No, it's definitely exciting to see some of those projects and some of the case studies. So, well, Vic, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciated it. Love the conversation today. How can people get in touch to learn a little bit more about some of your work and DroneU?
Well, mossphotography.biz.biz is my website, and more than welcome to go there. And as far as DroneU, thedroneu.com, and you can reach out to me, vic@thedroneu.com, and I'd be happy to answer questions there.
Great. And we will put that information in the description below for anybody that wants to get in touch. And a last thank you to our podcast sponsors, GRAD, providers of integrated solutions for accident reconstruction and crime scene 3D modeling. And we will see everybody next week. This podcast will be on YouTube. It'll be on the InterDrone website. It'll be on SoundCloud and Spotify and wherever pods are casted. So thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week.